Everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balkavage. We're back for another edition of Thyroid Answers podcast. We have another guest today. She is Dr. Shivani Gupta. She's an Ayurvedic practitioner. Be honest, we talked offline before we got on. I'm not that in tune with with what Ayurvedic medicine is until we had a little bit of a discussion. And now I realize, man, maybe I need to learn more. But she's here. She's going to talk to us about Ayurvedic medicine. She's going to talk about inflammation. She's going to talk about turmeric, which is something she spent a lot of time learning about and becoming an expert on. And so without any further ado, Dr. Shivani, welcome to the Thyroid Answers podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So I usually like to start by finding out from our guests a little bit more detail on who they are and why people should listen to what you have to say. So give us like a brief background in who you are, how you got into what you do, and what you're doing now.
Sure. So I am a Texas girl. I was born in Houston, Texas. I was raised by an immigrant family that had just arrived from India. And my parents worked their butts off to build the American dream. And what I saw was if you work really hard, you can be successful. But unfortunately, in my family history, there can be a price for that success. And so soon enough, we were going to India every year, and I would visit my grandparents and my family. And all I saw was everyone was diabetic and everyone was having really advanced stages of disease from that. So quadruple bypasses, Parkinson's, leg amputations, heart attack, stroke, like all this happened in front of me as I grew up. And my father was kind of like an original biohacker because he's like, we got to change this trajectory, especially for my own kids. So he had us drinking whole milk when the skim milk craze was going on, whole grains when the white bread craze was going on, juices, vitamins, green juice, all those things very early on. And so my whole world was very much about disease prevention, diabetes prevention. And unfortunately, during that time, I was also always sick. I was car sick, seasick, air sick, and any cold that walked by, I would get it. And in the US, when you go to the pediatrician, they would give me an antibiotic prescription and I'd get better. Or when I was in India, my grandma would reach into her spice cabinet and she would use turmeric and different spices and she'd heal me that way. And I always thought, like, wow, I live in two different worlds and they function so differently, but they both work. Like, how does that work exactly? And so fast forward, by the time I was in college, I was in Boston, sick as a dog, as usual. I finally looked at my parents and I was like, can we try a different way? We were in India and I had just gotten from college to India. And in India, I said, there's all this stuff out here, yoga, Ayurveda. India is so different. Let's go explore this. And Ayurveda healed me. Like, it is a powerful system. It's a treasure chest of knowledge. It's a lifestyle that we can live. And I realized the only reason we don't know about Ayurveda is because it's complex. We haven't simplified it enough to bring it into the West in a way that we can use in our modern day lifestyle. And so that set me on my journey. And I did my master's in Ayurvedic Sciences. I did my PhD dissertation on turmeric, the spice. And then I've become this super fan of let's reduce inflammation and let's constantly figure out how we can apply this lifestyle to our lives to detox and support ourselves so we don't build the level of chronic metabolic disease and chronic disease that we're seeing in the world due to inflammation and all these issues.
Awesome. So we're going to jump to inflammatory, what you think is driving chronic inflammatory processes. But let's kind of define what Ayurvedic medicine is and what makes it different than allopathic medicine, which is what everybody kind of grew up at, especially here in the States, and maybe the difference between integrative and functional medicine. Now we've got like so many different kinds of medicine, but what's really the difference between start with allopathic and Ayurvedic, and then maybe Ayurvedic and functional or integrative medicine?
Sure. So I look at Western allopathic medicine as our modern day medical system. We've got the subspecialties, they've got their toolkits. Usually their toolkits deal with pharma and surgery and different solutions in that arena that they're taught about that are science-based. And that's what they believe in, DOs, MDs, which is wonderful. When I need surgery, I really love that they exist and they can help me. And then under this umbrella of complementary and alternative medicine, that's what the NIH calls it, we have every other system of medicine that's existed, a lot of which are ancestral, ancient systems. So traditional Chinese medicine, 5,000 years old. So a lot of people use acupuncture, Chinese herbs, and all their teachings for their health. Then you've got Ayurveda, 5,000-year-old system from India, and this ancient wisdom Ayurveda means the science of life. So it's this entire system that shows us how we can bring body, mind, and spirit into alignment. Then under that umbrella, we also have other great systems: homeopathic medicine, naturopathic medicine, chiropractic. I consider under the umbrella of alternative and natural medicine systems, medical massage, Reiki, and that list can go on and on. And so what's interesting to me is I consider an integrative practitioner one who integrates within any of those natural and alternative health modalities. I consider functional medicine this new breed where a lot of them have come out of the Western medicine world disappointed that they weren't getting any solutions to their health issues. And they're stepping into this umbrella called complementary and alternative medicine. They're seeking as fast as they can science, validated scientific studies to prove the benefits of things, which is why you see so much of the botanicals, turmeric and ginger and all these, getting so much science published on them so fast, because functional medicine and most of medicine wants to see the science behind these things before they utilize it in a comfortable way. But within functional medicine, I do see this issue where sometimes they're still thinking like Western medicine, and because I go to functional medicine, we dig into all the problems. So they have great diagnostics: blood work, stool test, hormone test, food intolerance test, heavy metal test, mold test. Like, they can test you, genetic testing. So I've gotten all those tests on myself. But then the homework from that can be pretty extensive. Like, that homework can mean full-time managing your health and taking 50 supplements and doing all these things. And so that's where I feel like functional medicine needs a bridge into Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is that piece of the pie that we're forgetting, where if we shifted the lifestyle, we would hold whatever result we create in functional medicine. But otherwise, we're just driving ourselves nuts with homework, and we're not really fixing and finishing those root cause issues that we have to sustain. Like, you can fix my gut, but then I have to live the lifestyle to maintain it. You can fix my vitamin deficiencies, but I've still got to have held that lifestyle as prioritized so that the gut and the whole system is healed and whole. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said all that. However, I think how you described functional medicine, I think, is the problem with functional medicine.
Yeah.
And I think that the foundational concepts, at least is how I look at functional medicine, are probably tied to a Ayurvedic, much to the Ayurvedic concepts. Too often we jump to supplements to fix something before we say, do I have it? And I call them, in my book, I call them fitness factors. Do you have dietary fitness? Do you have emotional fitness? Do you have sleep fitness? How's your respiratory fitness? How's your physical fitness? Like, are you doing the foundational things that you need to be healthy? And if you don't do those things, all of this supplemental stuff really is just greenwashing of allopathic medicine, right?
Sure.
Because we're not actually addressing the issue. We talk about vitamin D deficiency. It's a $4 billion industry. Everybody's taking massive quantities of vitamin D, and we're no healthier than we were before. Why? Because one, we probably don't interpret vitamin D appropriately, and two, we ignore the cellular intelligence of likely what's going on, and just assume we can fix measuring, look at one marker and just load hormone vitamin D is a hormone, load it into the system and say, hey, if I bring the lab value up, I fix something. That's not functional medicine, in my opinion. That's just allopathic medicine with supplements. And I think that's where we get the bad rap from a functional medicine standpoint, is somebody does come home with 50 supplements. That's not sustainable. It's not affordable, and it's still missing the key points. So in my world, in my practice, and on this podcast, we're always talking about, you have to address these fitness factors. These are foundational. These are the things you have to do if you want to improve your health, improve your quality of life, restore your health, restore your quality of life. You have to do those things. There's just not enough supplements in the world to Band-Aid your way into health if you don't address those things.
Absolutely. And to add on to the point, I love functional medicine, because without functional medicine, I don't feel like we'd have the answers on ourselves. We need a lot more answers. And I look at functional medicine as like that perfect investigator who can partner with me and say, hey, have you considered that this is the issue? And so I've worked with functional medicine for years. they've been able to diagnose, okay, it's leaky gut. Okay, here, we've healed it. Good job. And then they'll sit me down again and say, you caused dysbiosis again due to stress. And they have the conversations with me like, hey, I really need you to reduce stress, Shivani. Like, this is showing up everywhere in your stuff. And I'm always like, listen, I am winning. I am not changing the protocol of how I'm dealing with my life. And then I laugh as a practitioner because I'm like, that's not even appropriate. Like, if you understand health, you have to address what your doctor is telling you. So I think it's a partnership. So I've told my functional medicine doctor, we are going to talk every other month. I'm scheduling it into my life because I need to hear you remind me on the lifestyle piece. I need you to keep teaching me why I have to address things. And imagine this is my own topic. So I think it's the partnership piece. We as the patient also are hearing take 50 supplements, and we're not listening to the whole part where our practitioner said sleep better, eat better, poop better, stress management.
Oh yeah, because it is much easier to just take a bottle of pills until you're, 3 years into it and you're like, I'm spending $3,000 a year on supplements and I still don't feel fantastic. So now I'm frustrated. So
yeah,
I think it's important that we keep those key concepts, whether Ayurvedic concepts or functional medicine concepts, or really just health concepts, is that you have to do foundational work if
yeah.
you want to get and restore your health. So you talked about stress. How, from an Ayurvedic standpoint, and you say it nicer than I do, you've got the little kind of
The Indian D in there.
yeah. I just don't have that skill set. So um how did how do you look at stress from an Ayurvedic standpoint? Just what does stress mean? Because most people, when they hear stress, they're thinking what goes on between the 6 inches of their ears, that's a stress and that's a problem. And they might say, how am I supposed to change that? So how does Ayurvedic medicine look at stress and define it?
We very much look at it as you're either in balance or out of balance. And the language we would use in modern day times for what Ayurveda described is parasympathetic and sympathetic. So a lot of the Ayurvedic lifestyle is built around when you eat, how you live according to the circadian rhythm. Like the main pillars of Ayurveda are knowing your individual mind body constitution, your dosha, because understanding your dosha is going to help you stay in alignment with your nature, which reduces stress. We teach circadian rhythm, circadian clock, chronobiology is what we call it now. But circadian clock means if you're living in rhythm and flow with nature, you won't have a stressed out body. But if you're defying nature, if you're sleeping late and not sleeping enough and running your day upside down, that's a stress on the entire system and every cell of the body. We teach about the sattvic diet, this diet that's about whole food, nourishing, fresh food, eating seasonally. All of that reduces stress on the system as well because you're getting the right nutrition at the right time of year for your body and body type. Then we teach a lot about herbs and spices that we can use. So if we're going through stressful times, we could reach into the adaptogenic world and the plant world for those supports. Then we teach a lot about sleep. Sleep is so important. Self-care rituals throughout the day to build a rhythm that detox the body. So I kind of look at stress as that outside pressure that's going to cause damage systemically to everything. And if you pay attention, it's going to affect your hormones, it's affecting your gut, it's affecting your brain. I mean, there's not a system that's not impacted by us constantly being in this gear called fight or flight and not being in the gear of rest and digest. And so Ayurveda's main tenet is gut digestive fire is the center of everything. And we know that stress damages the gut. So we look at it as how are you going to build this rhythm in your life, a morning routine or evening routine, whatever works for you, that involves meditation, yoga, deep breathing, the things that you need to put into your toolkit that build stress resilience and support you before you embark on the busyness of your day.
So I think the challenge is we think about stress as this bad thing, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you said something right at the end there that I probably agree with more, and that's stress resilience. We look at stress like it's this bad thing, like, hey, everything is to some degree a stressor. Well, I shouldn't exercise because that's a stressor. I shouldn't, like, do challenge myself at work because that's a stressor, right? So we've got to be careful, I think, sometimes with that terminology that's stress. And everybody says, oh, it's just stress, it's stress. And then they do less and challenge themselves less because they don't want to stress their physiology. And now they're still just as sick and have very little resilience. So
Sure.
I would look at that maybe a little bit differently. I agree with the general concept, but I don't think stress in general is bad. I think excessive stress is where we've got more of a load on the physiology than we can adapt to. We talked offline, homeostasis versus allostasis shows if somebody's in a homeostatic state, you can stress the physiology and they can respond appropriately. But if we have excessive, chronic, ongoing stress, then the body says, whoa, this is beyond what I can adapt to. Now I actually have to shut down or slow down some physiologic properties to shift the attention and energy to something that's more important. You're talking about digestion. If somebody is under lots of emotional distress and they're running around and they're, having high levels of anxiety as a result of some altercation, their digestion is going to be downregulated. That is an adaptive response. If that goes away after 10 minutes, guess what happens? Their gut physiology can come back online. They get relaxed, they can eat, and they can digest. So do you see that there's a difference between stressing the system which triggers more resilience versus the excessive, chronic, ongoing stress? Do you see a difference there?
Absolutely. I think we know that yoga, exercise, cardio, like there's so many things we're doing to ourselves that are good stresses. We know there's this importance of building stress resilience and those like buckets of stress resilience within us. Like it's important. People are doing cold plunging for that. Infrared sauna, we're doing more extreme things to the body because we understand the benefits and sometimes the stress resilience aspects. I think the bigger issue is in modern day society, this overconsumption of social media, of whatever else we're consuming, has us in this chronic stress state where we're always on and we never turn off. I see people who say, yeah, every time I walk or do cardio, I'm watching videos, I'm listening to podcasts. Like there's never silence, there's never space. So if we're not going to give silence or space or calm and peace to the body, when is it going to go into homeostasis and go do its job properly? Body has a lot of things it's got to do. It's got to clean and repair and throw out the trash. Sleep is a big part of when we do that. And if we're not giving ourselves sleep or any breaks in our day, like there's many times where because of the nature of how I'm building my business and speaking, I am just traveling and on the road and moving every minute of the day. So if we don't bring that consciousness back in a rhythm, then that's where that chronic stress can take such a toll. And we were talking about thyroid health and all these things, like every single system is affected by chronic stress.
Right. So it's more about the overload than it is the individual stressors, right? Because if you want to train to run a marathon, it got to stress you, right? But if I make you train every day in, day out, no rest, no recovery, limited sleep, yeah, you're doing something that you think is good stress on your physiology, right? Hey, I'm training for a race. That's going to make me healthier, fitter. But at the end of the day, without giving yourself time to recover, you're in chronic overload. And that's when we stay stuck in more of an allostatic regulation and something's got to give, right?
Totally. And I look at it as, can you 3x your self-care in proportion to your 3x lifestyle? Like for me, when I'm going at full throttle in my company, I'm like, okay, well then I need 3 more hours of self-care or breaks or mental breaks. Like when I go for a walk in nature, don't do anything else during that time. And so I really think we have this ability to build more breaks in to deal with this chronic stress.
And isn't it a lot? And maybe Ayurvedic medicine has a way to do that. But I look at a lot of the stuff that we experience and we say these are negative stressors on our physiology. That's just how we frame it many times. Okay. And many times we look at something and go, oh my gosh, this terrible thing happened. And now that's creating all this problem. But that's how I framed it, right?
Sure.
I framed it as an issue. I framed it as a problem. I'm framing my relationship with my spouse She's always giving me grief. That's how I'm framing it. That is just the reality I'm creating. But I could do the opposite. I could take that same tension that's occurring between maybe me and my spouse and say, you know what? I'm going to change that situation. I hear we're in an anger, but I'm going to use that in something positive. And now this thing that looks like a negative stressor no longer is. It's about reframing how I perceive it, not how it's coming to me. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And what a beautiful point. I think we do take things and turn them around. And just based on our mindset, we're turning them into stressful things. And because we're turning them into stressful things, they're constantly causing us stress. And so, even I myself, with my clients, I teach them a lot about building a beautiful self care rhythm. Why? Because if the attention is on self care, self love, then when things come, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not going to affect you because you already have your foundational rhythm to your day. Something comes along, you accept it and say, okay, cool, that happened. That's more work I have today. Even I myself in my business had to realize, okay, your entire life dreams are coming together at one time. Yeah, that can look stressful, or it can look like your entire dream is coming true. Can you enjoy the wild ride? Because this is the year for the wild ride. And next year, it might be a really slow raft going down the river again, and that might be the pace. So I agree with you. We sometimes need to understand that the way we're framing things is its impact on the body. And
Right.
so even in Ayurveda, we teach so much around what you consume is affecting you. If you're going to watch violent movies and scary movies before bed, that's the gift you're giving your brain to chew on all through the night. You could just as easily give yourself the opposite, spiritual or positive personal development. You could gift yourself anything, and then that mindset shift is what's going to drive your physiology.
Yeah. I think it's a huge part because so many of our clients come to us and they're like, all of these things happen to me, and that's why I have my chronic illness. These things in my life, these traumas, these experiences, this is why I'm ill. I'm like, you don't have to carry your traumas around with you like a backpack and have it define the rest of your life. You're choosing to some degree to let those experiences find your future, find your health, define your happiness. And we don't need to do that. We can make decisions, even when terrible things happen in our life. We can use them as a building block if we're open to it, or we can use it as the anchor that sinks us. But it's
True.
really important what goes on between the 6 inches of our ears. But let's talk about like this overload of stress, right? From your point of view, how is this chronic stress overload contributing to these chronic health issues that you see and potentially the chronic inflammatory processes that we see in the body for which you're now spending your life developing tools to help that?
I look at it as when we're going to put chronic stress on the system, if we're going to overload the system and the system doesn't quite know what to do with it, we're going to do two big things that affect us. One, we're going to affect gut digestive fire. So in Ayurveda, we teach that this fire, we call it Agni, which means fire. This fire in our belly is to be respected like a campfire. So when you build gut digestive fire, you're going to bring in the small branches, the medium branches, the bigger branches. You're going to create this fire. And each of us has that Agni. We can have either a really strong digestive fire that's going to assimilate and digest and give us all the good nourishment out of the food and kick out all the things that we don't need, excrete them. Or we're going to have a weak Agni, weak digestive fire. And if that weak fire cannot process what we're eating, we now know through science, as our intestinal lining shrinks as we age, as our body slows down all of its processes, that weaker Agni is very problematic. We're not going to absorb the food. We're not going to digest it, assimilate it. Things will leak into our bloodstream, causing leaky gut, autoimmune, which I don't like that word either, but cause the system to react. And so that's one big issue is our digestive fire strong? And what are we doing to honor it, respect it, and grow it so that it can handle a lot? Because if we're stressed constantly, we're going to keep weakening it, damaging it. And then that has a million different problems associated. Weak digestive health is immune system, it's brain health, it's mood. It's probably why we have a lot of the issues we have right now in life, because that fire isn't turned up and tuned and calibrated to what we need individually. And then part two, immune. Like when we talk about the lymphatic system, a clogged lymphatic system that can't clean and flow and smoothly get rid of everything and all our trash is a big problem. So whenever I'm stressed, I can tell I'm going to eat worse, I'm more inflamed, system is more congested, more brain fog, not making room or space to do any detoxification. The body's not going to detox when you're stressed anyway. It's just not going to move into that process. And so here we have a traffic jam. We've got inflammation, gut, lymph, all congested, all jammed up and busy. And then viruses come along and no one's got time to handle that. And then we've got sickness and issues. So I really look at chronic inflammatory diseases and that forest fire that's happening in our bodies as the problem that's created by us sitting, not only eating inflammatory foods, we're causing inflammation a lot of times. We're also clogged in the lymph. We're also stressed. And then this world around us has a lot of environmental toxins that are adding on top of the pile. And so it's like this perfect storm that's creating chronic metabolic disease. So I look at it as address gut first, detox, address lymph second, and then all of a sudden everything can start flowing and we can bring the body to homeostasis. The body wants to heal itself. We're just throwing too much on top and not letting it do its job.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said. I think the other thing I would add to that is that this excessive load of stress on our physiology, whether we realize it or not, triggers changes in chemistry. And one of those big changes is it upregulates the sympathetic nervous system.
Sure.
And we upregulate the sympathetic nervous system, that is going to create the adaptive downregulation of the parasympathetic, the rest digest system. And if we rush in and just try to fix a gut, right, with a GI protocol that we saw online, but we don't address the windup of the sympathetic nervous system and the limbic system, it may work temporarily.
Right.
Then when the supplement's gone, it comes back, or it works. The strategy works for a while, and then it doesn't work, and then we try another strategy, and that doesn't seem to work. But I think that piece is important, and I know you were already thinking that, but I wanted to clarify it for the person because they'll be like, "Oh, I just got to do a gut program." Well, I see people that have done 10 gut programs before they got to me, and I'm working on their gut too. But we're also saying, look, we got to address this, but we also have to address the why. Why is your sympathetic nervous system upregulated? Why is this parasympathetic downregulated? And that becomes important. And I do want to jump onto this before I ask you the next question, because we talked about this offline. Well, what about different, in thyroid physiology, why not just give somebody T4, or why not give them T4? Why not give them armor? If they're not doing well on T4, if they have low T3, why not give it to them? And the big reason for that, is that when you provide thyroid hormone to the body, especially in this stressed inflammatory process, a hypothalamus, the pituitary, those receptors are 10 times more sensitive than the peripheral body receptors. So the type of receptor in there is just way more sensitive to it. So when you saturate the hypothalamus with thyroid hormone, that is going to upregulate the sympathetic nervous system. So when we come in, so this goes back to the question we talked about offline. If we provide more thyroid hormone in an inflammatory state, in a stress state, we're going to upregulate brain, upregulate the sympathetics, downregulate the parasympathetics, and that's going to contribute to more anxiousness, more anxiety, more histamine responses in the physiology. So we need to be very careful and cautious when we're providing thyroid hormone support, especially in the person who doesn't really fit the true guidelines for replacement therapy. We used to say patients shouldn't be getting thyroid hormone replacement until their TSH is over 6, maybe over 10. Now people, I have a patient the other day whose TSH was 2.8, and they were put on thyroid medication 3 years ago and haven't felt well since. And it was because somebody said, well, it's not in the optimal range, so we need to optimize TSH by putting you on armor. They had TSH was a little bit functionally high, T4 was normal, but T3 was functionally low, and they wanted to optimize it, and it sent this person on a 3-year, merry-go-round of trying to feel well when they probably didn't need to do that at all. That slight rise in TSH was probably appropriate to a systemic threat or inflammatory response. There was a short-term decreased conversion of T4 to T3. That physician caught them at a time when it was just this adaptive change, wanted to help out by seeing these values weren't optimal, and then provide it. So I say all that just because I think we need to keep these things in mind when we're treating. And what we talked about offline is, from an Ayurvedic perspective, those ideas or concepts kind of do fit in with what we're talking about. Like, hey, there's an intelligence here, right? That we have to ask the question, why is the body doing this, versus I need to optimize in a state when maybe the optimized state is the state that we're seeing sometimes.
You know what's crazy about what you're saying? I have actually taken Armor Thyroid for years, and it really helped when I first took it because it felt like I put glasses on in my brain. I felt like I got my focus back, I got my energy back. It was post-kid, so I just needed the support. And I actually was able to at some point detox and come off it, and I was fine. Then I restarted. And recently I went to the doctor and I was like, listen, I need a revved up metabolism. This is perimenopause. This all sucks. I'm doing everything right, which is in air quotes, everything right. And so we doubled my Armor Thyroid just to test what it would look like in my system. I feel like a Ferrari that was going at 5 and now I can go at 6. And it's a really great feeling because it's like brain on full blast, body on full blast. And as it's happening, my intuition and my Ayurveda brain inside of me is like, this is not good, right? Like, it feels really good in the short term, but that when you were doing everything right, there were pieces in there you were not addressing. You're still going to have to address them. It's like a pay Peter to steal from Paul. It's that idea. And I can tell that it's happening and that I'm going to have to shift back. But unfortunately, in modern day times, we want like the quick solution. And most of us don't want to just meditate and yoga and do all the things because there's limited time in the day. I'm in my 40s, between the kids and the grandparents and life and the speed you go at, it's almost like taking speed. Like you want like that support.
And I totally agree. I just had this argument with the clinician the other day, and we were talking about it. They're like, why wouldn't you optimize if it makes them feel good? I'm like, because it's like crack.
Yeah.
You give that first hit, you're like, somebody's like, wow, I feel great, but they can't get that high again. And then they need a bit more and a bit more. And especially, we talked about this too, with Armor at a 4-to-1 ratio, you're saturating T3, especially at the pituitary, which then results in a lower TSH. If I suppress TSH, now I'm reducing the amount of T4 I can make at the gland, and I'm not taking enough T4 when I'm suppressing it. So now over time, I'm going to have lower T4, less circulating T4. And what a lot of people don't know is that the T4 that's converted to T3 inside the cells stays in the cell for about 8 hours. The T3 that comes from the bloodstream, like I just took my T3 medication, only stays in there for about a half an hour to an hour. So you don't get a sustained effect. And when you're constantly upregulating that sympathetic nervous system, there is going to be a price to pay in time. So it's it's tough because you have I know everybody wants to feel good, right? And that's what we do with almost everything. Hey, I want this short time. I just want to feel good. And then we get like, oh man, now it's not working, or I plateaued and now I need more. And now I got this other issue going on. Like, what is going on? Now my gut's not working right. So we have to, I'm not opposed to people doing something to feel better.
Yeah.
Right. But we need to be cautious. We do have this kind of thing, like, you do no harm as well. This kind of motto, like, to do no harm. And so in an effort to make somebody feel better, ourselves feel better, or function better, we got to be careful not to do harm.
For sure.
Right?
But thank you for explaining that. It didn't occur to me, the impact on sympathetic, which is so funny. But the last thing I would do in my life is anything that would put me in a gear that would keep me in sympathetic. I was already having that problem. That problem is the global problem that we all have. I shouldn't say all, most of us have. We're choosing to build work and life at a pace that's not sustainable for the body. we're shutting off gut health. By shutting off gut health, we're shutting off all health. And
Yeah.
that's literally the main central theme of Ayurveda is build gut, support gut with love. And so you can, every time you sit down to eat, pause and take a deep breath. So you absorb the nutrition of that meal. But what if in the background you were already revving at sixth gear, like going 200 miles an hour? So you think you're doing parasympathetic work to drop into your parasympathetic, but there's no going there because the gear you locked yourself in is different. Like that
Right.
is potent. That's this very powerful knowledge bomb you just dropped there.
And so we think about that too, like, hey, I need to be in a parasympathetic state, so I'm going to do my meditation. I had a woman, you know, very driven, very business oriented. Like when I would be talking, we have our consultation. She's got people running behind her and asking her questions. I'm like, hey, just 30 minutes. And you could see she's so wound up, right? And she's got chronic gut issues. And I'm like, hey, we need to work on like calming down. She goes, I just did 30 minutes of meditation. I'm like, well, it didn't work, right? If you just did 30 minutes of meditation, like it didn't work. And I said to her, like, you need like heart math or something so that you can see immediate feedback. Because if you did meditation and it didn't change your state, it didn't work, right? So we have to be really, it's good to do these things, but if we're not in a state or actually changing our state as a result of doing these things, sitting on the floor going, and doing some breath work while you think about the 35 things you need to do rest of the day, you're not getting there, right?
True. No, it's true. It's true.
So this stress overload, the significance of this, and we kind of talked about this with the sympathetic nervous system. When we upregulate the sympathetic nervous system, especially chronically, part of the signaling aspect of that sympathetic nervous system is to release some inflammatory chemicals. Like, hey, if we're in chronic threat, man, what are we fighting against? And that drives, right? That inflammation downregulates the peripheral metabolism, which results in things like the glucose resistance, and then in all the tissues, and more glucose in the bloodstream, and then fat deposits and fat storage, and all these other things we see. Inflammation is going to get blamed then. Well, it's just because you have inflammation. And we have tons of people today that every day they're taking Advil, Tylenol, everything else to suppress inflammation. I remember having a client who had an injury in his back, and he would take Advil before he goes to play golf. And then when he finished playing golf, he'd take a couple more Advil, and he's wondering why his back and knees can't get better. I'm like, because you're assuming that the inflammation is the problem. I'm like, but if you don't have some level of inflammation in your system, those cells can't rebuild, regenerate. Stem cells don't get activated. The issue is the chronic overload. So how do we figure out like how much inflammation is good, how much isn't good, and how do we address this physiology without suppressing it excessively and inhibiting our ability to heal and repair?
It's a great question. I mean, I think most of society right now, we know that we are inflamed. We know that chronic low-grade persistent inflammation is wreaking havoc. Many times people have an injury and then unfortunately there's an inflammatory response, but for some reason it doesn't stop. And I think that's because, like we've talked about, the body is overloaded. We're in sympathetic. Body is never getting to move back into homeostasis and rebuild, detox, repair, and do the things it needs to do. And so what's interesting is, should we be taking NSAIDs every day for our pain? No. And that's been the body of my work for the last 10 years.
But I feel better when I take them, right? Isn't that the argument we just had, like the discussion we just had, right?
Totally. My mom takes Advil every day. I'm like, Mom, you can't take Advil. She goes, no, I just feel better. I have no pain. My knees. I'm like, I got you double knee replacements. You were supposed to become a runner magically.
Mm.
But no, the shift isn't happening there. The shift is, I just want to be out of pain. What can I take for that? And so my whole mission has been, since I studied turmeric, I'm like, guys, did you know that turmeric is anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, anti-candida, anti-H. pylori, anti a lot of other things. It's going to kill off the cells that don't belong in our body. It's going to kill off zombie cells that are going in there and infecting everything. It's a powerful anti-aging solution. what I love about reaching into the plant kingdom for those solutions is there's such an intelligence within the plants. Turmeric is also adaptogenic, helps with stress. So if the body is going to always be in sympathetic, which many of us are, if we're going to have this chronic inflammation, which in some people manifests as joint pain, fatigue, headaches, swelling and fever, which is a little, it's common and not common, different gut issues, then using a solution like turmeric, you like we're discussing, these are all good solutions. Sometimes they should be used as temporary solutions, not long-term solutions. You can use a solution like turmeric, get in there, support the body in reducing the inflammation that's problematic. What's good is, from what I've seen, is turmeric is going to do its job and then it's done. And we shouldn't take any supplement for every day forever. We should then take a moment and say, okay, I got your joint pain down. Good job. Like, that's been my focus for 10 years. After that, what's the next step? We have to talk about your sleep. We have to talk about your mobility and movement. We have to talk about, are you moving in nature and in rhythm with nature? Like, what is your diet? How is your bowel movements? Like, how is your gut health? There has to be that whole other piece. And so that's why I've been passionate about turmeric this long. I still am. But now I'm having much bigger conversations around, can you focus on sleep as your number one health priority? Can you sleep when the circadian clock says to sleep, 10 to 2 on the clock? Like, can we take building blocks of health and invest in those and make those like the law in our lives? So for me, as poor as I am at stress management at times, because I'm in very busy seasons in my company, I have certain priorities that are non-negotiable. Like, my sleep is my number one. My exercise and weightlifting is my number two. My diet and the way I eat in rhythm is my number three. My self-care rituals that I know I have to do just to stay upright and alive and focused, my number four. So I have a rhythm, but if we can each build that own custom rhythm for ourselves, then when it comes to this topic of inflammation, all of a sudden we're giving the body the space in the different time zones of our day and our year, week, month, year, really, to reduce that inflammation and get everything into the right level of inflammation. Because like you said, not all inflammation's bad.
Yeah, we need some for the listener. It's like we can't suppress the whole thing. It's a huge signaling molecule. It helps with do so many important things, and especially with tissue regrowth and repair, that if you just constantly are bombing your system with anti-inflammatories, especially ones that also have the potential to have a more toxic effect, you're probably not going to do the things that were driving the inflammatory process to begin with, and there's the potential downsides as to what's going on. So let's talk about turmeric, what it is. And we talk about so many things. I'm a huge fan. I mean, I utilize it as well. I'm a big fan of sulforaphane as well. These, plant-based things that can trigger immune, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant effects. Talk about, and from an Ayurvedic standpoint, maybe they don't get into the mechanisms of action, but if you did a lot of work and literature on this, you probably are aware of what are the mechanisms of action. How does something like turmeric have such broad effect on the physiology? Sulforaphane is a huge upregulator of NRF2. Does turmeric have the same impact, and is it working? You see it from other mechanisms as well?
Well, what's interesting about turmeric is it impacts so many different pathways in the body. So NF-kappa B, TNF alpha, IL-6, IL-9, many of the interleukins, COX-2 pathways. So because turmeric will impact so many different pathways of the body, that's why we're seeing this interesting moment in science where the level of scientific studies and double-blind placebo-controlled trials and published papers on turmeric is just growing exponentially. So back when I did my PhD, I feel like the science was like maybe 1/5 of what it is now. And it's just so fascinating. Knee osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, cardiovascular disease, it's anti-obesity. It has a positive effect on the gut microbiome. We know that it can be a good partnership in cancer treatment and make treatments more effective. So issue after issue, we're seeing its impact. And I think that's because, first of all, it connects to so many different pathways of the body, but also I've been working with geneticists to understand why is it that so many of our genes interact with turmeric so well. It's like one of the rare things that interacts with that many of our genetic pathways. So it's just an interesting moment in science where turmeric in ancient India was used for everything. It was used as an antibacterial topical. It was used as a nightly solution for your immune system and your joint pain and to create ease. It was used as a powerful immune support. It was like our broad spectrum solution. I always make fun that it's like our Swiss Army knife, or if you've watched My Big Fat Greek Wedding, it's our Windex. Like we used it for everything. But now, the way I like to teach it is raw turmeric was used in ancient Ayurveda, but just as a radish or garnish. It wasn't used in the food very much. We didn't juice our turmeric. Instead, we dried it into the spice. And out of that spice turmeric that people are using, only 3% is the curcuminoids. Out of those 3% of the curcuminoids, curcumin is the most effective at reducing inflammation. And so giving the right proportion of those curcuminoids is going to drive the best result according to the science we have. And then we also know that non-curcuminoid turmeric, the other 97%, still has benefits, but we're still studying what those benefits are. And we haven't yet found which molecules or extracts within it are as effective as that top 3%. And so that's why you see this exploding world of turmeric supplements. But the problem is in supplements, we don't have standards that are, we don't have regulation that'll control how we make them. So there's different groups that are just giving you regular turmeric in a pill. They'll call it curcuma longa, 1,500 milligrams. That's just regular turmeric from the grocery store that costs you $3. We didn't need to encapsulate regular turmeric. And then when it comes to that extract, when you really pull that extract in the right proportions, in the same proportion as it is in the plant, and give that to the body, pushed, it's not about pushing, but extracting it over a 95% grade standardization, that's where you start to see tremendous results. And so I'm part of clinical trials. I'm part of trying to publish more science on this, just to prove to Western medicine that this is a great adjunct solution if you are going to give someone something for pain. Like people are going to orthopedics every day for NSAIDs and painkillers. But what if we gave them a natural solution and they came off the other one faster and they got less side effects?
So we'll get into, I want to get into the what people should look for and why, but I just want to kind of finish that conversation. And maybe you know, maybe you don't, but is the impact on turmeric both direct on all these systems, or do we think that it's indirect, like a sulforaphane, where it's upregulating NRF2 and 200, NRF2 upregulates 200 genes that help with antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and detoxification, or do we think that a lot of it is doing it directly on some of these genes and enzymes?
I don't know if I have the exact answer. I know that it's inhibiting a lot of the pathways, and that's why we're seeing its impact.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know it definitely has an impact on NRF2, but I don't know necessarily some of the other mechanisms. But that's, for the listener, I think that's where when you read something like turmeric or sulforaphane, like how can it help with cancer? How can it help with this? How can it help with that? How can it help with this? As something that's upregulating NRF2. NRF2 is the master antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, detoxifying gene. So when you upregulate NRF2, which is this gene in the body, it turns on a whole bunch of different things. Like when you're just doing glutathione, you're pushing a pathway. When you're upregulating NRF2, you're turning on 200 different genes that do all these things. So it's really, some of these natural products can be really, really powerful and help a lot of systems because they're not treating a disorder or disease. They're helping the body's natural regulation of the immune, inflammatory, antioxidant processes. So it turns on both the activation of a pathway like glutathione pathway, but it also supports the genes that might help with recycling of that glutathione. So if you're just loading glutathione into a system, you have to make sure you have all the tools in place to deal with the downstream effects of the glutathione's reduced form or the oxidized form, or otherwise now all that glutathione you're taking every day now becomes an additive to your oxidative burden. So from a standpoint, there's so many supplements on the market today that probably have turmeric on the label, right? You started to talk about this.
Orange juice will have turmeric on it, and you're like, okay,
right. So for the general public and the clinicians too who listen to the podcast, what should they be looking for when they go to say, I want to put my patient on turmeric. We've got a chronic immune inflammatory process. I want to help reduce some of that inflammatory process to kind of calm it down, not shut it off, but calm it down while we start trying to identify the root factors, which are contributing to that load. So what should they be thinking about what's the label? What should it say? Where should it, what should they be looking for? And then what should be, and I hate doing dose-based things, but what is an appropriate dose? Sometimes what we do on labels is we give a product that's not very good, but we give a lot of it. And so the American way is, wow, if you've got 8 grams of that, that must be better than this thing that's got 1 gram, right? But we don't know that the thing that you're buying 8 grams of is pretty pitiful in its functionality. And the thing that with the 1 gram where you're thinking you're not getting value is way more functional and potent.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought it up that way, because I actually forget to explain it that way. When it comes to turmeric products, the problem is there's a lot of cheap ones on the market. And what they do is they put a lot of turmeric in there. So they'll say curcumin or curcuminoids on the top. Many of them don't have a standardization, which means you have no idea what potency you're getting on earth. Then they'll say curcuma longa or turmeric powder, 1,500 milligrams. And so, like you said, you're going to think you got a lot in there. You're going to think, wow, I'm getting like 2,000 milligrams of this stuff. But it's irrelevant because you're not getting a dosage that's potent enough to drive a significant result. And so for me, when I finished the PhD, I thought, what if I create something that's so potent that I can drive this like insane result, and then everyone will reach for that? And so that's what I did. And I created something with a 95% grade potency, but we actually know that in our testing, we reach above it, 97 to 98%. And then thus we're landing at the standard. We're not trying to push to meet the standard. We rise above it, so we land there. Then we don't stuff a ton of turmeric in the pill. That's a waste of time. 50 milligrams of turmeric is enough. Then any supplement for turmeric should have healthy fat or a black pepper in there. Black pepper is going to increase the absorption of turmeric by 2,000%. And in my dissertation, in the conclusion, I put in there that there's no apples to apple study between healthy fat versus team black pepper. And so I'd like to see that study in this life. I'm probably going to fund it myself out of curiosity. But that's why taking any turmeric supplement with a meal can be even more beneficial, because you'll get the healthy fats from within your meal itself. Now, when it comes to taking a turmeric supplement, out there, again, there's so much of a difference in quality. And so just look out for curcuma longa, turmeric being on the label. There's a lot of games that are played, and I just look at supplements as I'm not buying it off Amazon or a drugstore unless it's a medical grade, third party tested, I prefer made in the US supplement, owned by a founder who I can talk to and meet, who I can get to know. Because a lot of times supplement companies, even in the healthcare practitioner space of chiropractors and practitioners, a lot of those companies have been sold to multinational conglomerates. Sometimes that's okay if you know who the founder is, but sometimes you don't. And I just don't want to take that risk, because we know that a lot of supplements don't have the active ingredient at the levels that they promise. The New York Times or the Wall Street Journal did a study. They walked into drugstores and tested and saw that. And as someone who relies or has relied on supplements my whole life for my immune system, I need to know that I'm getting what I pay for. And so that's very important to me in the supplement world, is I believe in US made, third party tested. You should be able to meet your factory, look them in the eye and know what's happening and do inspections. Like that level of quality can exist in supplements.
So just repeat that again. When we look at the label, it should have black pepper extract on it.
Correct. It should have some turmeric powder, but 50 milligrams is enough. Doesn't have to be 1,000 milligrams or 1,500 milligrams. And when it comes to the curcumin, make sure it says 95% standardization of that curcumin in that label, because otherwise you don't know the potency of it. And then a good dose of curcumin per day is 1,000 milligrams a day. You can divide that into 2 capsules, one in the morning, one in the evening. I don't recommend taking it all at once. I do recommend splitting it up. And if someone has a lot of joint pain, you can increase that to up to 1,500 milligrams a day. Our contraindication is blood thinners. If you're on blood thinners, do not take curcumin supplements. You have to really beware. And we know up to 8 grams a day of curcumin is safe. So people sometimes play with that a little, but the standard response is 1,000 milligrams a day.
And so when somebody looks at a label, some of these supplements out there will tell you that it's a proprietary blend.
Yeah.
But shouldn't it, is it good enough that there's a proprietary blend and it contains 95% curcuminoids and black pepper extract? Or should we know how much of that turmeric extract is part of that blend? Because couldn't we just have a lot of black pepper and not much turmeric extract?
Yeah, I mean, I have proprietary blend on one of my formulas, my inflammation relief, but I still pull out curcumin and explain that the curcumin's 400 milligrams in that product. And then the only reason people do proprietary blend is so no one can copy your exact formula.
Right.
But as the consumer, it makes it really hard because you're like, how much should you give? We have to give the exact proportion of the ingredients. So the order of that ingredients does matter. Factories are always checking and making sure that we're being honest and accurate, which is good. And if you do third-party testing, that's always going to be there. So if it's turmeric first, that's what is the most. If it's curcumin second, that's what's second. And if it's black pepper third, that's what's going to be the least. But you're right, you will not know the proportion. You just won't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
My case, I could rattle off to you exact. I know exactly the milligrams of Guduchi versus everything because we do things in big proportions in Ayurveda. That's 400, 150, like for how we build. But yeah.
so if somebody's decides that they want to add uh, turmeric or a turmeric blend or as an anti-inflammatory to their system, how long do you think? Because people take things and they don't know. I took it for a week, it didn't make a difference. Took it for 2 weeks. What's realistic in a time frame to say, you know what, I think I noticed a difference in symptoms and or potentially see a change in the inflammatory molecules or inflammatory lab values that they might look at?
So typically for someone to feel the difference, we say 7 to 10 days because everyone's gut absorption is different. So I find some people are so clean in their system. Next day, they're like, whoa, I felt that. And then most people are like 5 to 10 days later, they're like, wow, I feel different. My joint pain is different. I had these aches and pains, they're different. I'm waking up feeling better. I usually say take it for 30 days. That's when you're going to start to see shifts. Could take up to 60 days for us to see it in our blood work, right? It's the cumulative effect of it. But yeah, it's interesting to see who feels what when. What the phone call I get the most is when people leave town without their turmeric, they'll get back in town and they'll be like, oh, holy God, I had no idea how effective that was in my life until I left and forgot it. And then all of a sudden I realized how essential it had become to me. So people will share how it affects all sorts of things, joint pain, back pain, those things. Also, some people have told me it completely cleared up their high cholesterol. It was the only thing they changed. Some people who have different issues with inflammation, with urination, like prostate issues, they've shared that it fixes that issue. So it's interesting to me, just anecdotally, what I've seen is it addresses big issues first, the pain, the bigger inflammatory issues. Then it'll go after like medium, and then it'll go after small. So people will say my asthma, my allergies, my gingivitis, things that I never would have expected to get solved or impacted positively are then impacted. And I think that's just a testament to if we can reduce systemic inflammation, we can win. And like we discussed, okay, great, you reduce the systemic inflammation, you won. Now let's go address root causes because that's gonna have to be a piece of the puzzle.
So there a bunch of papers that talk about the absorption of some of these plant-based products. Do you know what the absorption, what percentage of the in general that's absorbed? And then is there anything that can be done to improve the absorption? Is it the black pepper that's really helping with the absorption? And if it doesn't have it, that's why I've seen things as low as 2 or 3% absorption up to 60, 65% absorption. So is it black pepper that really makes the difference? And if it doesn't have it, that's why those studies show that it's so low?
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's so funny actually, because a lot of times you'll see curcumin studies. It'll be curcumin, black pepper, and then they'll give like plain curcumin. And they're like, oh my gosh, that's why there's such a difference. Or curcumin healthy fat versus plain curcumin. That's why I said they've never been apples to apples studied against each other. Yes, there can be a huge variation in the absorption of turmeric because in ancient India and current modern India, all of our turmeric that we cook, we use a spice called garam masala that has black pepper in there. The cooking already had the intelligence to always have alongside it the things that help it absorb. And whenever in cooking, you're going to use ghee or butter or oils, and that's the base before you add your spices or turmeric. So it's interesting how in the cooking and in the food and in the culture that was already built in. So when you take a supplement, it's important that that supplement has the black pepper or the fat in there. Lipid-based curcumins exist or black pepper curcumin supplements. Otherwise, you will not have the significant absorption. It'll be a waste of your time.
So that brings up then two questions. You're talking about, culturally, it's used in the cooking process. So how does cooking or heating the curcumin change its effectiveness? So like if we take, do we get, I'm guessing then that raw versus cooked is going to have a different capacity. Does its functionality change, or is it just the absorption changes?
It's interesting. That's a beautiful question. I have not even read about functionality versus absorption of raw versus cooked anywhere, because so much of the science you read, if you're digging into PubMed all day, we're talking about curcumin, we're talking about extracts. And then the only other aspects of turmeric we're really reaching into are the turmerols, the different other extracts within non-curcuminoid turmeric. One of my advisors, my PhD advisor in Houston, he worked at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and he's the one who discovered that black pepper increases the absorption of turmeric by 2000%. So when he sat me down as I was finishing up everything, he said, look, remember, turmeric has other benefits in it that increase the absorption. We can't be so modern in our scientific thinking that we just pull the extract out and just give that. Always make sure you're adding the turmeric back in for the absorption. Whole plant with extract. We will be seeing more science going into the future about the benefits there. And so now it's actually more common to put turmeric into a turmeric supplement with the extract. And I'd say about 10 years ago, it wasn't common. They were all just curcumin extracts. On the conversation of heat, it's actually interesting because I have seen and read about heat not being good with turmeric, and we've always cooked it. So my thought process and my intuition says that over time, in the Indian culture, we're eating turmeric. We're the largest consumers of it. We use it in almost every dish. That turmeric is creating this baseline support of turmeric in the system. But modern day society has us inflamed and under assault with our health and environmental toxins at a level that's unprecedented. So I think that cooking turmeric idea was great, but it's not enough to match what's happening now. It's like saying if you wanted vitamin C, you can go eat an orange and it'll equate to taking 500 milligrams of vitamin C. There's just a huge difference there in terms of proportions. And so I don't think raw turmeric is as well absorbed as the powdered turmeric, even when cooking. And I have to like validate that. I have to read more, but that's based on everything I've read. That's the answer I'm getting out of my own brain. And then to take the extract is to drive that real therapeutic, significant result that we're looking for.
So because it absorbs better in fats, right, then that opens another problem, right? If we have somebody with digestive issues, biliary issues, thyroid issues that are impacting biliary flow, if we have somebody who's got estrogen, elevated levels of estrogen dominance, high levels of estrogen metabolites that can constrict the sphincter of Oddi, we're going to potentially have reduced absorption, potentially, right? Because we're going to have decreased breakdown of those fats and therefore reduced absorption. It's also, you talked about lymph, right? All of those fats are coming in through the lymph into the GI tract. So if there's lymph issues going on, that may make it a little bit less effective. That doesn't mean somebody shouldn't utilize it, but that could impact the effectiveness of it. There's some discussion about how it's made, that it maybe if you micronize it, that it's more absorbable. Is that correct or not necessarily?
There's a lot of new study happening around nano curcumin and all the different ways we're going to play with it. I find it fascinating because I'm always pushing for like, what can we do to increase that absorption? Because like you said, we know the modern day gut has issues. And so if we're not pushing for that absorption, we're not always going to get that significant result, the dramatic result that we want with the system. I don't know. I think that extracting is one thing, and playing complete games with changing something's structure when it's from nature is a whole different ball game. So
Yeah.
even though I constantly want to push the science forward and patent cool things and make them, my bigger concern is how's the body going to receive that? We can't make everything foreign and then say the body's going to receive it with its own intelligence. If the central tenet of Ayurveda is circadian rhythm and nature, we still have to dance with nature. So that's where I'm not a fan of the nano idea yet, but I am exploring it to see, like, is there a potentiality there, or will we not see a difference? And I'm always going to compare apples to apples to see.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things, like sometimes we want to make something like better. And in the process of making it better, we lose its effectiveness, right? The old chicken noodle soup study, right? Where they said, well, if chicken noodle soup makes people feel and function better, it's good for their immune system. Let's just tear it apart, figure out which individual ingredient it was, and we'll just make it. And then they found that everything that they could break down and break out and tried individually, it didn't work. And so it was the combination, the synergistic effect of those things in it that had the potent effect, not any one individual ingredient. So I agree. Sometimes in an effort to try and optimize, which I kind of hate that word a little bit, but optimize the absorption of it, do we change the structure or function of it in an effort to optimize its absorption? And maybe, we think about the intelligence of the body. Does the body only absorb a certain amount of it as part of an adaptive response? Like, hey, we got to control how much of this stuff comes in at one period of time. Maybe that's the body's natural way of saying, hey, we're not going to allow you to overload on this because we're only going to absorb so much of this stuff at a time. I don't know, just things to consider and think about.
True. No, it's very true.
We didn't get into circadian rhythms and all that stuff, but I want to be respectful of your time. We only got a couple minutes left. So if you want, we'll bring you back and we'll get into more of that. I think we had a good conversation so far. But I want to give you a little bit of time, tell everybody about because you make products. So I want to give you some time so you can talk about your products a little bit, what's unique about them, and then where somebody might be able to find out more about you and your products.
Sure. So I created a product line called Fusionary Formulas, and my whole dream is for it to enter Western medicine, which it has done through hundreds of doctors, and be used as this adjunct solution, just an alternative solution, so that when we walk into the doctor and say, hey, I'm in pain, I don't feel good, and the doctor's like, well, you're inflamed, they'll offer this as that natural support. And then it's also on my website, because over the years of speaking and teaching, people always want a solution for their joint pain, their chronic joint pain. They want to keep their hand function, their knee function, their back functioning. So the website for that is fusionaryformulas.com. After creating turmeric solutions, I've really played a lot with sleep and adaptogens for menopause and all the different issues that my group of women is struggling with, perimenopause and all. And so I've created those things as well. Fun teas, because I think whole plant has such a powerful effect in the body. So if you can create a functional tea, I wanted to see, can we drive a therapeutic result as well, which has been really cool to see the effects. So that website is fusionaryformulas.com, FUSIONARY formulas. And I made a special code for your audience, Thyroid Answers. We'll give them 15% off. And then my website is my name, ShivaniGupta.com, where you can find info on Ayurveda, circadian rhythm, and all these things as well.
Awesome. Well, I think we did it. We got through a lot of stuff. I think it was a great conversation, very informative. So I appreciate you coming on the Thyroid Answers podcast, and I'm more than open to you coming back and covering some of the things. I know there were some topics we didn't even get to, but still, I think we did get a lot covered. So thanks so much for coming on Thyroid Answers podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.